back to my channel. So this is some more videos then on the Autism Mental Health Conference, because National Autistic Society, because the other video cut out of me because I had so much to say. And I was still talking about the talk done by Sarah McCulloch, who's an autistic occupational therapist, and I was just discussing the issues that she brought up in the conference. So I forgot to mention, she also mentioned, so she talked about misdiagnoses being common. So she talked about, first of all, sorry, I'll go back a bit on myself. First of all, she talked about autistic people much more likely to need mental health services. She talked about autistic burnout, which I talked about. She talked about how misdiagnoses are common, for example, personality disorders, because the traits can overlap. That specific autistic needs are under-recognised, misunderstood. She also mentioned physical health and some common physical health difficulties that might be more likely to affect autistic people, including sensory difficulties and things like that, and how all of that interacts with mental health. She talked about some of the limitations of tests. For example, they're reliant on reports of childhood and so on. And I was saying how actually I disagreed with that, because autism is a childhood condition, and therefore, you should be looking at childhood, because otherwise, I was saying I didn't quite understand her point there, because obviously it's a childhood condition, so obviously you're going to be looking at childhood development quite naturally. Like when you go for diagnosis, they often ask for, I know when I was diagnosed, that was a very big part of the assessment, like looking at old reports and school reports and my educational psychologist reports and all of those things that showed a trail of difficulties and everything, and how it all added up to autism. So you do need that evidence is very important, I feel, in a proper assessment, so I didn't quite understand her point there, really. She talked about masking in women in particular, and how that can maybe, camouflage autism. She talked about how the assessments are impairment-based, which misses successful autistics, and I was saying how actually I'm different, because I actually don't really see how the medical model does have its limitations, but I'm actually quite happy with the medical model, most of it, because I do think autism is a medical condition and I have no problems with that. And and it is an impairment, basically. You have to, sometimes I just feel like people like to put their head in the sand and try and ignore difficulties, but autism is an impairment, and I don't feel there's any shame in admitting that. And I also feel there is some danger in diminishing the impairment, particularly for autistics who do rely on state support systems, where I do sometimes feel like this could actually play into the hands of reactionary governments. Oh, autism's just different, we don't need to provide support for this group. I do worry about that, and how sometimes these more successful autistics actually can end up, because they're really privileged and stuff, really don't have much insight into the problems of autistics who want benefits, who actually really are properly disabled, and they assume that the medical model, all autistics don't like a medical model, and that's not always the case, because some autistics actually rely on the medical model. So I disagree with that. And where was I? I was just trying to cover the ground to where I was. She talks about the importance of autistic identity, because many autistics have low self-esteem, so sort of knowing that they're autistic and incorporating that as an important part of who they are and understanding what it means can be very helpful, which is true. It is important to know who you are and everything, particularly if you spent a lifetime not knowing who you are. That can be really important for mental health. She talks about the importance of autistic culture and how that can help. Personally, I'm not entirely sure what she means by autistic culture, because there isn't one thing. And if she means neurodiversity type of culture, that doesn't include all autistics, and can also be quite elitist and exclusionary. I don't really feel like I belong in that paradigm, because it doesn't really incorporate my own experiences, and often you're not allowed to talk about impairment and stuff, and people can be quite hostile if you start talking about impairment, which can be quite discriminatory towards autistics who do feel impaired. And there's no such thing as one culture, so that it's great, if you do feel like you can relate to a culture, but personally, I haven't really found that, really. I do feel that this autistic culture there are two autistic cultures, I feel. There's the autistic culture that's neurodiversity-based paradigm, and then there's the autistic culture for those who feel excluded from the neurodiversity paradigm. So I don't. Autism isn't one thing. It's a bit like the women's movement, you know, the feminist movement, which excluded working class women and black women and other ethnic minorities and things like that, who often felt excluded from the narrative. And I feel that it's similar with the autism movement. It doesn't really. Some autistics do feel excluded because their reality often isn't discussed. And I do feel particularly autistics who've never worked or who really struggle on that level and on benefits and things like that can often not relate or struggle to relate to the experiences of autistics who are more successful, and often their experiences aren't represented, unfortunately. But that's the case with all movements, as it is often dominated by the most successful who do most of the talking, unfortunately. But I think they just need to be aware of that, you know, who has the power here, you know. And obviously I have more power against someone who can't talk at all, you know, I have more privilege relative to someone who can't talk at all, so it's, yeah, I just feel people need to be open and admit these things, you know. So that's where I kind of got up to. She talks about the neurodiversity model gathering strength among employers, where it's becoming easier to talk about autism at work. She talks about autism is not a learning disability, and that can create misunderstandings where people think autism is a learning disability, and then they might discriminate against people by assuming that they can't do something and they think they've got a learning disability when they don't. She talks about the importance of autistic role models, where autistic professionals come out about having autism and they make autism normal, and this idea that they can do it, and so can I. Personally, that doesn't work with me. I actually can feel it quite demoralising if there's an autistic who's like really successful, and I use successful in inverted commas because this is how society defines success. You can be successful in all sorts of ways, but if, like, say, if there's someone who's basically an autistic person who's like, you know, in a really good job and has never experienced life on benefits and all of those sort of things, I do, you know, and then they're kind of like, I wouldn't see them as a role model. I'd actually feel quite demoralised and deflated in their company. For role models for me are autistics who are like me on benefits, who are struggling every day, have got very similar experiences to me, and they might say, do some, like, for example, I know someone at a group I go to, I hope she won't mind me mentioning this, it's all anonymous, who basically has inspired me recently to try crochet, for example. That's an autistic role model. She's basically similar to me in some way. We're different, very different people, but similar in a sense, you know, that she's actually properly disabled by her autism. She's on benefits. I think she's on benefits, but she's not in work. You know, similar to me in some respects, you know, I can relate to her experiences more than I can to say someone who's very successful, you know, in work and all of that. And but she's inspired me to try out crochet. That's an empowering autistic role model, because it's not someone who's like way above me. You know, she's on a similar playing field to me, but she's inspiring me to try something I haven't really done before. That's an autistic role model. I don't think it's always very helpful to have role models who are like way above you. It's a bit like, say, idolising celebrities. It can't always be helpful, because most people aren't ever going to be a celebrity. It's not really a very helpful role model. Real role models are people who are similar to you and in the same kind of situation in life. And I do struggle to relate to autistics who have completely different experiences to me, like are working or in relationships and stuff. I just find it very difficult to relate. So it depends what role model you're talking about, really. We can all be role models for other people at different times, but I think the best role models are people that are on a similar level to you and are just inspiring you to try something a bit different that you feel is achievable and that isn't completely not achievable, you know? So, where was I? Yeah, she talks about conflict between medical and neurodiversity model, things like that. I guess there's conflict there. I don't think there needs to be a conflict, though, between a neurodiversity paradigm and a medical model. I think there's this false conflict, because, like I said, the social model, which is what the neurodiversity paradigm heavily draws upon, can be useful in certain contexts, but again, so can the medical model. So I don't think there needs to be this conflict between the two, and I just think there's this binary and extreme reaction now against the medical model, which I just feel is not very helpful. Because the medical model isn't all bad, certainly parts of it needed addressing, but it's not as black and white as that, really. And it can be helpful to some people, the medical model, particularly those who might need certain interventions for their autism. So she talks about autistics not living a good life. You know, many autistics don't live a good life because their needs are not met. And that we need understanding in society. She said this lack of understanding for some autistics can result in trauma, and this can then result in mental health problems. So then mental health services spend a lot of time repairing the damage, whereas we should be not doing this very well, whereas actually we should be trying in the first place to ensure that autistics don't experience this trauma in the first place, and obviously that relies on making society more autism friendly, which, Ben Catriona, might not be pronouncing her name properly, says that we all need support, so really we should be talking more about inclusion and support. I'm not quite sure what she meant by that. Yeah, everyone needs support at different times in their life. Needing support is natural and human, but obviously, clearly, there's support and then there is support. And I feel that not talking about words like support in this kind of postmodern landscape where everything now has to be all about, sort of not using language that people feel, it doesn't sit well with me. Like, yeah, it's a bit like an Animal Farm thing. We're all equal, but some are more equal than others. And I sort of feel that sometimes these really able autistics sometimes end up kind of like missing a point. And actually, if you are really disabled, the type of support you need is way more than, say, someone who isn't disabled. That's just a fact. So I do feel that not talking about support can actually harm people who actually do really need it. That's my opinion. Where was I? She talks about autistic burnout and how it's different to depression because burnout is more environmental and you need to change the environment and you can't treat burnout with antidepressants. And I think that's kind of where I got up to. Oh yeah, she also talks about the similarities between the gay movement and the autism movement, which I don't quite understand personally because I do feel that people in the neurodiversity movement often try and compare the autism movement to like the gay movement and things like that. And while, there might be certain parallels, and again, we can compare it to, say, the women's movement, while there might be certain parallels, they're completely different things on many levels, because obviously, like, if you're gay, historically, you were massively disabled by society, like, and that's where the social model comes in. Your medical model doesn't apply to the gay movement at all. Like, I know some people have used conversion therapy and try and treat gay people as having a medical problem, but obviously that's completely inaccurate and homophobic, because being gay there's nothing medically wrong with you if you're gay. That is a natural variation. It's a harmless natural variation. It's it's not medical. There's no impairment there. There's nothing needing to be treated. Historically, if you've been gay, you have been disabled by society. Like people haven't been able to get married. You can now, but historically you couldn't get married, and certain religious institutions still prevent marriage. At one point it was actually against the law, and but it's different to autism completely because, autistic people actually have a neurological impairment. It's a complex interplay then between society and a real impairment and how they interact. So some of the disability is caused by society, but that's kind of, adding more difficulty onto an already pre-existing difficulty. So the difficulties are already there, and then society can make those difficulties more manageable or more extreme, depending on what society you have. Whereas if you're gay, historically it was 100% society that was disabling you. There was nothing innate that was causing a problem, it was 100% society. So there are differences there, and as a gay person, I'm also gay, so I can kind of see that, how they're completely different. It does kind of annoy me a bit how the neurodiversity movement always talks about the gay movement as though that's somehow comparable to the autism movement, when I feel they are different things. She also says that maybe we should move towards a model that sees autism as just a minority, like a neuro-minority in society, and that's all it is, just a minority, just a neuro-minority in society. Again, that's often what the neurodiversity paradigm often sort of emphasises, autism just being a neuro-minority and nothing more. But autism is more than that. It can be a really profound disability for many, many people. It's not just a quirky difference, For many people, it can be a very serious disability on both the medical and the social sides, which I feel that very, very successful autistics often try and deny, and it's not always very helpful to those who are more disabled. She brings up how maybe we need to have a neurodevelopmental pathway, not just an autism pathway. So in other words, when someone goes to get assessed, that maybe they should be assessed on a neurodevelopmental pathway as opposed to just an autism pathway. In other words, where they're assessed for all these other conditions like dyspraxia, ADHD and things like that very often coexist with autism. Because she said, it doesn't make any sense being put on a waiting list for autism, so you get assessed for autism, and then you have to be put on another waiting list and wait yet again to be assessed for some of these other conditions. And I completely agree with that. It doesn't really make any sense, that we have all these different pathways. It costs money, people have to wait. Why can't we just all be assessed, you know, in one fell swoop for all of these conditions that are so often go hand in hand? You know, because that would just save money and it'd be more effective. And you know, as these conditions do so very often overlap, you know, that would make sense. We really need clinicians who have expertise in all of these conditions and how they overlap and can assess for them in one assessment. Obviously that would take longer. Autism assessment is already very long, but they can maybe spread it out over, say, a week or something, you know, and do it like that or something, instead of putting people on all these different pathways. So I do agree with her there. Where was I? So yeah, as I say, with that one, there were things I agreed with, but also things I disagreed with. Okay, she also said that she's out and proud as an autistic person in the job that she does. And she often comes out about it to her clients, that she's autistic, and I hope that would inspire them. I'm not sure that would inspire me, but as I said earlier on, I personally quite like to have non-autistic people who help me on a professional level, but that's just my personal preference, because I like the objective distance. You know, I sort of see it as a bit too close to home if someone with the same. And I don't know whether this is true for other conditions or minority groups in society. There might be shared themes here. That sometimes you do like the objective distance of not having someone in the same group as you giving help sometimes, but I don't know whether that's just me. That'd be an interesting sociological study to find out. It can, you know, for psychological reasons, self-esteem issues and other issues, sometimes people do like the objective distance that comes from not having someone with the same baggage sort of helping them. But obviously everyone's different. Some people might like it, I don't. She set up the Autistic Empire, which is an organisation, you can Google that by the way, which has been set up by for autistics and autism as a civil identity. It's very, very neurodiversity paradigm based, so it doesn't sit well with me, but if you're interested, do go and check it out. Okay, so I'm going to move over to the next video now, because I've talked a lot about Sarah McCulloch's talk, because there's a lot of points raised, and I'm going to have to do so many videos on this because there's so many things I want to cover that were talked about at the conference. So moving over to video number 2 now.